Hello everyone, and welcome to day number 23 of your daily Chofetz Chaim. Today we continue with the Chofetz Chaim's introduction to the laws of Lashon Hara and Rechilos, as he lists more mitzvahs that a person can violate through speaking Lashon Hara. And he says, number 11, in addition to everything else that we've mentioned, a person can also violate the mitzvah of Es Hashem Elokecha Tira, the mitzvah to fear and have an awe of Hashem, which the Chofetz Chaim says refers to a scenario in which a person finds themselves confronted with an opportunity to sin, and at that moment they need to arouse within themselves the knowledge of Hashem's providence. Hashem is watching them as they do what they're about to do, and that Hashem will pay us for our deeds, both good and bad. And this knowledge should help us resist the temptation to sin, and by doing so we are fulfilling this mitzvah. However, if we do not, and a person simply goes through life without even trying to stop himself from committing the sins of Lashon Hara and Rechilos, they are certainly not fulfilling this mitzvah and are in violation of the mitzvah of Es Hashem Elokecha Tira. And number 12, there is another mitzvah the Chofetz Chaim says that a person violates by speaking Lashon Hara, and that is the mitzvah of Limud Torah, the mitzvah of learning Torah, which according to all opinions is one or more of the 613 commandments. And the reward for learning Torah is boundless. As we know, our sages teach us that every single word of Torah is worth more than all of the other mitzvahs combined. And the flip side of that coin is that the punishment for bittul Torah, for abstaining from Torah, from stopping to learn Torah, the punishment for that is also comparable to all of the sins combined. As the Medrash tells us that during the time of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, Hashem was willing to overlook the three cardinal sins of idolatry, adultery, and murder, but he would not overlook the sin of bittul Torah. And at times, the Chofetz Chaim says a person can be absolved, so to speak, or exempted from this mitzvah, because a person needs to make a living. And in order to make that parnasa, a person needs to be involved with that. However, if a person is speaking Lashon Hara, there's no excuse. If a person is able to stop their work in order to speak Lashon Hara, then certainly they could stop their work to learn Torah. And by using that time to speak Lashon Hara, they are certainly in violation of this mitzvah. And the Chofetz Chaim has a note, quite a lengthy one, to this, and I will just paraphrase it, in which he says that people need to recognize that the Yetzer Hara works very hard when it comes to a person making a living. And his tactic is that he always convinces us that we don't have enough and we always need more. He says a person needs to realize that that is the Yetzer Hara talking. When you think you need to grow your business more, you need to make more money, you need to develop everything more and more and more, he says the Yetzer Hara is the one talking who's convincing you that that's the case. And he's never going to stop. You'll never be happy with what you have. You'll always decide that you need more. He says, but the reality is that anything beyond what you need is considered extra. And anything that is extra, a person is not allowed to do that if they are supposed to be learning Torah instead. So a person should be very, very honest with themselves and recognize how much effort do I need to put into my business to have what I need versus how much effort am I putting into my business, which is taking away from time that I should be learning Torah instead because I want to have extras. The Chofetz Chaim then goes on to say that it is so important for us to recognize the greatness of the mitzvah of Torah, and that no matter what happens, a person always needs to fulfill the mitzvahs of learning Torah, whether they're on a high level or they're on a lower level. It doesn't matter. If a person's on a high level that they're able to learn very advanced Torah, then they should do that. If they're on a lower level, they should learn on a lower level. He says even to learn Torah books that have been translated into the local language is also a fulfillment of this mitzvah. And even to learn the works of Musar, of character development, of ethics and morals, all of that is also part of Torah, and a person should not sit and speak Lashon Hara instead of involving themselves in these elements of Torah as well. And then he mentions the famous teaching of the Vilna Gaon, who explains the difference between din and cheshbon. Din means judgment, and cheshbon means calculation. What are these two elements that are both present in Hashem's justice system? So the Vilna Gaon explains that din, judgment, refers to the judgment for the sin itself. Cheshbon, the calculation, refers to the calculation of what good we could have been doing when we were doing that sin instead. And the Chofetz Chaim says, woe is to us from the day of judgment. What will we say if Hashem will just calculate for us the moments in which we spoke words of non-importance, words of nothingness, words that were not necessary, and certainly the words of Lashon Hara and Rechilas and other forbidden speech, just the amount of time that we could have been learning when we were doing all of that. Because the truth is that for every single word of Torah, a person fulfills a tremendous mitzvah. And if a person were to learn a chapter of Mishnah, of Mishnayos, or a whole page of Gemara, how many hundreds of mitzvahs a person would have fulfilled through all of that. As the Vilna Gaon explains in the name of the Yerushalmi and others, and therefore if a person were to just count how many thousands and thousands of words of Torah have been lost, and each one of them is such a tremendous mitzvah that's equal to all of the other mitzvahs, and how instead we've replaced all of that opportunity with words of worthlessness and words of sin of Lashon Hara, how terrible our fate will be with all of that. And certainly, if a person spends their time when they should have been learning instead speaking Lashon Hara, that is also every single word of which is considered to be its own sin in and of itself. How terrible will that calculation be of how much Torah we have given up for all the moments that we spoke Lashon Hara, and in their place we've replaced them with the terrible sin of Bittul Torah, of stopping from learning Torah, in addition to all of the sins and positive commandments that we've mentioned that are involved in Lashon Hara. And therefore the Chavetz Chaim says that it is so important for us to be so careful with our speech because of all of these combined factors.